Hi, I'm Dave Temkin. Nice to be here this morning. I am based out of Walmart's Hoboken, New Jersey office. I am responsible for our enterprise network, so edge, WAN, data center, basically as I'm calling it from core to store. Our data centers, critical facilities such as distribution centers and fulfillment centers, excuse me, in addition to asset management, business continuity, mainframes, other fun things. Before Walmart, I was at Imperva, which is a cybersecurity company, basically rebuilt their operations from the ground up so that we could sell them. We sold them to Thales about 6 months ago now. And then before then, I was at Netflix for 13 years. I led the team that built the content delivery network known as OpenConnect, so everything that happens after you press play. That said, nowadays, there's a lot more of things that happen before you press play as well. So today I want to talk a little bit about what our open source journey is at Walmart. I'm going to frame this with, I've been at Walmart for about 4 months now, so discovered a lot. There's still a lot more to learn. It is a huge organization. The scale, which we'll talk about shortly, is second to none. And what I think that does is really drives home the ability to use open source technologies to run large infrastructure at scale. And so we think about, say here with decades of runtime, we have an infrastructure that has grown organically with the chain over the years. It's not easy to just come in and say, okay, I'm going to rip something out and move to something new. We have to keep this business operating 24/7 with one of the largest networks in the world. And so let's talk a little bit about what our scale is, what our challenges are, how we've adopted open source and how we've contributed, and then how we can work together as a community to continue to grow. Let's talk a little bit about the scale of Walmart. And so some folks come to me and say, hey, Dave, you worked at these big internet companies. You worked at Netflix, you worked at Yahoo. Why would you go to retail? That seems like an interesting transition for you. And I say, in one word, scale. And we talk about here over 10,000 stores worldwide, over 1,000 global supply chain locations, 240 million customers served per week, so that's omni-channel, so that has everything to do with both our retail operations as well as our online operations. 2.1 million associates employed globally. And of those 2.1 million, every single one of them, whether they're in an office or they're in a store, are carrying around at least a mobile device connected to our network, and often a laptop or some other device similar to that, as well as POS and point of sale and things like that. So from a network scale perspective, that number is hugely impactful. And then you see, we start getting into the network geekery, 100,000 plus routers and switches. 75% of them are PoE enabled, which seems kind of, to some folks in the room might feel a little trivial, but it's actually super important to us, and I'll discuss why. And you see over 700,000 PoE ports, 450,000 wireless access points. And within that network, over 5 megawatts of power consumed for those types of devices, WAPs, phones, cameras, other IoT devices. Random stat, does anyone want to guess how many pounds of bananas Walmart sells a year? No? Over 1.5 billion. That's a kind of older stat, but I found it super interesting. So when I talk about how we have to think about scale and the variables that puts into our network that I may not necessarily have to think about in smaller networks, visibility. Right? I have to know what is going on across this chain, this 10,000 plus locations, this e-commerce platform at all times, right? And this is, again, there's nothing off the shelf that solves this problem. There's not one single software package that I can install and say, now I've got visibility across my entire environment. I need to reduce the operational overhead of managing those elements out in the network. And so if I've got a bunch of different vendors with a bunch of different platforms, I have to worry about everything from feature parity through to bugs and through to security. And so the more that I can consolidate around code bases, the better my operational uptime is. I have to manage where my traffic is going through that network. I have to load balance that traffic through that network to end elements. And one of the things that I'm thinking a lot about is device life cycle within that. So when we've got a chain, as mentioned, over 500,000 network elements, I'm starting to think about this like painting a bridge. By the time I'm done modernizing that entire chain, I'm going to have to come back around and start all over again. Because there's just no way for me to roll things out in parallel in that large of an environment. While we're thinking about that, right, I have to think about kind of feature parity. I have to think about what these platforms have. I can't just throw the kitchen sink at my environment, right? I can't take software that is just every single feature enabled. I can't take hardware that has every single bell and whistle, because either A, the cost of that is going to be too high, or B, the complexity of that is going to be too high. And so within that, I want to stay vendor agnostic as best as I possibly can. I want the ability to choose what works best for my environment at any point in time. And then cost management. We talk about things at Walmart in the context of EDLC, everyday low cost. And really, every dollar that I save in the network is going to go back to saving our customers money, and that is paramount to anything else. So, transitioning a bit here to talk about a couple projects that we've been involved in and/or consume. So, we're currently deploying enterprise SONiC at scale in our data centers. But what we would really love to be able to do is to pull SONiC out of the four walls of our data centers. As I mentioned before, this is why I'm talking about things like PoE. We want to be able to put SONiC in our stores, in our distribution centers, in our campuses, right? With the number of employees we have, these campus networks are gigantic by comparison to some others. And so what we've already seen in our data centers is great results from an operational perspective. And what we want to do is continue to invest in that. So we want to be able to grow and hire talent that know and can help us invest in SONiC, in community SONiC specifically, and provide contributions back to the community in addition to the work we're doing for our own infrastructure. We also are heavily involved in Leaf. And so Leaf is an orchestration platform for eBPF programs. I actually kind of heard reference a little bit to kind of the early iterations of eBPF earlier with the panel. Really think about it as kind of a marketplace for eBPF programs, the ability to chain programs on a single network interface. In our case, we want to be able to run multiple programs in order to do, as you see here, gathering metrics, rate limiting, load balancing, things like that. We use the eBPF platform for DSR, which for those of you who know load balancing is incredibly important to be able to scale load balancing. And if we think about the programs that we're using it for, so observability, I think, as I mentioned before, hugely important that we're able to see what our traffic looks like, where it's going. Network functions, so prioritization within the network, classical QoS type stuff. Security, obviously very, very important in an environment like ours. And we see, a really, really sustained business impact. We see, our e-commerce platforms. We see better site speed. We see, which, obviously leads to fewer bottlenecks, which, leads to value addition and ROI, aka customers using our site more, which is what we want. And so, how can you help and contribute along with us, right? We are invested in making sure that these communities continue to grow and flourish. And so, as I mentioned before, we want to help get community SONiC to be really enterprise ready, right? So power over Ethernet, 802.1x, a uniform, useful CLI. These features, 802.1x specifically, right, from a security perspective, hugely important in the enterprise. You may not think of it so much in the data center. CLI, this comes back to the ability to manage these things out in the field. We want to see feature parity across multiple vendors. We want to help accelerate SONiC bug fixes. And we also want to invest heavily in open source SONiC automation. So again, when we have to deploy to 10,000 plus stores, 100,000 plus network elements, automation is key. I can't have engineers logging into systems and running things. And I don't think that's anything new to most folks in the room. But at this scale, it goes from really not a good thing to just absolutely impossible. And so what I'd like to just call on the community for is for the community's help to help us and help the community, both in the SONiC domain as well as in the Leaf domain. And that's it from me. Thank you so much.